So yeah, I did my PhD here and now work at University of Edinburgh, but it's a college of art. I used to be in architecture, but I just moved slightly to the design school, largely because a bunch of research over the last few years has dealt with this conversation with myself and colleagues and with things and what things might be. And in the design school in particular, I think there are things in every department, but particularly in the School of Design, in the context of ubiquitous computing, things are really under scrutiny at the moment. And I think what's happened recently is that in America, we seem to have, when you think of things, you might think of objects. And actually that's not the case. Things are actually events, or they're events under contested events. So actually going for a cup of tea is a thing. But if I take you for a cup of tea, I don't expect you to scrutinize the object of the tea. That's not why we've gone for a cup of tea. We might have gone for a cup of tea because I'm really sorry you've lost your job, or you've got a promotion. So these things are very complicated spaces. In Scandinavia, in fact, things are still what they call parliament, because parliament is a context in which things are contested. That's where things are drawn about. So, and more recently in digital culture, technology, computing, ubiquitous computing, Internet of Things as a phrase has turned up. And I'm beginning to find problems because this, if you agree with me, come with me on this conversation about things as being broader than the material table. If you come with me on that, the computer scientists aren't coming. The logistics community who want to deal with moving things around aren't really interested in contesting whether a barcode is attached to your parcel or not. It's a matter of fact that it is. Okay, so there's a number of kind of, I suppose, art strategies that I'm using to open up what might be thingness. And how do we bring a cultural conversation about thingness to what is otherwise quite a dumb, dry, logistical sales pitch on behalf of some of the big corporations, Google and IBM, you know, the same old characters. So the story here, and as I say, it's a little unrehearsed. Bits of this I've rehearsed, but bits are just fresh. Is trying to talk about how things have moved through my practice and some of the research projects and how they keep changing their identity and their role, sometimes arguably their agency, how they move and they become different things. So those are the projects, and I'm not really one for drawing lines, but this is a story, so there is a series of points along that line. So let's go to the first. Now there's a series of establishing frames which I'm still wrestling with, which is really concepts of time and temporality within networks. And what I'm going to do with these segue slides is move through network time to one of the projects, which is the Sixth Sense Transport Project. But let's just a moment on network time. This is St. Augustine, and St. Augustine had this fantastic wrestle with God. He had this dialogue with God. Now it's interesting, and the illustrations and paintings that you'll find of St. Augustine, a Benedictine monk from 11th century, is very much central to temporality. His temporal consciousness, as Nigel Thrift might call it, is that what's going on here, and what he's doing as he stares out of the window, is actually negotiate something that is emerging, this temporal consciousness, which we see particularly in the UK, through, from the Middle Ages, Benedictine monks. Benedictine monks are very interesting. They were the ones that could read. Very, very good. And they held reading. And although the church didn't own that much land, it was often a brokerage between people who did own land, kings, queens, so on and so forth. The church were very powerful because they could read and write. And if you can read and write, you can do a number of things. Critically, and what I'm interested in, and what St. Augustine and the philosopher Paul Ricoeur was interested in, is how that develops a temporal consciousness. Because if you can write, and let's look what you've got in front of you, these pads, you've evidently got some history. You've got pages that you've written on before. So that's interesting, that you've got an idea of time past, and you're carrying it with you. Imagine not having the ability to write down yesterday. What does that constitute that yesterday existed? And what if you've got extra pages? Wow, you don't just buy books which are full. Well, you do actually, because you want to find out about pasts and build futures from those imaginations. But you've got future pages, which suggest that tomorrow might be coming. Now, these are all part of grand narratives, teleologies, models of time which also the church perpetuate the idea that we have start, middle and ends, be it Judgment Day or be it the end of your education. Do you still have part threes? You still after your part three? You carry on, you go for it. You aim for that, that I don't know what you expect to happen on that day, whether it's some divine intervention, but you gun for it. It's St. Augustine did, and part of his critique, his wrestle with this grand narrative was very much about the model of temporality then. God sets up this uber model, this huge teleological framework, and of which he's caught trying to wrestle personal time. And Ricoeur talks about time of the soul, and then universal time, or time of the world. And there's a number of vocabularies, but very much about time of you and time of the world. And as I look, I get a moment of time of the world, because it's actually 11 minutes past 1 o'clock already, and I only got through 3 slides. So sometimes you move from a very personal model of time to a big model of time, and that's particularly interesting. Now, the letters he wrote to God are particularly about this. How does he reconcile his time, his not knowing what's coming on the page? I don't know what I'm going to say next, but I have a faith that I'll say something, so it seems to roll, and you're not quite sure what you're going to write next. So these conditions of planning, situated actions, moving toward, but carrying the past with you is something interesting. Now, the same look of fear, in this context, it's utter fear and consternation, is thrown from St. Augustine into a 2010. So nearly a millennium later, the look of fear and absolute terror of what's going on here is another temporal crash, a temporal conflict. And in this context, it's the speed of networks. The body, the time and the body, for which for hundreds of years have been connected to the time of the world, is beginning to be extended, twisted, and placed under a great deal of stress because of network time. Now, the speed of networks is extraordinary. It's beyond that you and I can perhaps comprehend. So it's not easy to tell. Stories don't travel across data networks at the speed of voice. They don't write, they're not counted in words per minute. And what these chaps are experiencing is on May the 6th, 2010, in 4.5 minutes, from 2:41 p.m. to 20:45 p.m. and 27 milliseconds of a second, prices of the E-mini, which is just a stock, if you like, had fallen between 5%, between 22, 23 and 2045. As prices of the E-mini rapidly declined, the selling algorithm sold 35,000 E-mini contracts. Now that amount of contracts for that company constitutes $1.9 billion, sold in less than 5 minutes. Now the implication for that is that you get a tremendous flash crash. And the look of fear on those guys is simply that they're watching 2 computer algorithms sell. And they get themselves into a fire sale at the speed of networks. Now, the speed of these networks is extraordinary. I mean, it used to be something that was perhaps material, that trade was always material. Before the Bretton Woods Agreement collapsed, we used to account for gold as being a primary connected to the dollar that allowed us to trade on a material connection. That got severed in the 70s. But what's happening here is these fibre optic connections between the stock exchanges of London and New York are now the substrate for a different material, if you like, and temporal exchange. And this is this extraordinary fact that Project Express can allow these dueling algorithms to compete and exchange and sell data so fast that it's outside of any human comprehension of time. And that look of fear is returned from St. Augustine, or questioning St. Augustine, to something that happens on digital. I mean, this is what's happening. Instead of running the cables down the trenches, which was somehow safer and clearer, the Project Express hugs the Newfoundland coastline, and because that's slightly shallower, instead of going down slightly deeper, it shaves off, let me do my maths, 5.4 milliseconds. Now, 5.4 milliseconds is enough time to compete in a dueling algorithm in a transaction. So if you can write the shortest code to sell or to buy, and you can get yourself on the Project Express fiber optics on the cable, you will sell and make more money than anybody else because you can make the fastest judgments and transactions. The problem is, we don't understand this. The problem is we have no way of reconciling this model of temporality. As you know, it's changing finance. And the look of fear, or have I got that picture somewhere? I haven't, but the look of utter consternation on those guys. The only thing they could do in 5 seconds, in the 4 minutes, was pull the plugs. They couldn't shut down the algorithms. They couldn't kill the application. The only thing that they did on that day was yank the cables out. Some very material, very actual action of the body to stop what was just a wholesale disemboweling of a huge company. So this is the perhaps context where if we then think about our relationship with time, space, each other relations, we begin to get a different platform, a different conversation. So the first project then, starting to move to the sixth sense transport, is this is still a problem, that St. Augustine's condition is no different from it was 1,000 years ago. We're still presented, but what we've got is a stress a pressure that changes how we begin to do. I mean, you've got families trying to find family time. My kids, I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they really want to spend time with me and mum. They really with board games are really, I don't know what it means in the family, but they're absolutely obsessed. They just come across whist. I don't know whist, but geez, teach the rule bases to a 10-year-old and he just wants to play it all the time. Far more interested in computer games at the moment in our family. But there's a lot of pressure in our family because I'm pretty busy, mum works as well, so time is very complicated. Both kids are now used to time. They've been through education. They know what the bell means. They can both tell the time. So they've both learnt quite systematically what it means to work according to their workhouse day. They know when the bell goes, that's time for a break. They know when the bell goes, it's back to work. So we've got a number of conditions which are now set up in a context which, in terms of modernity and looking at what happened over the 20th century, is that time and space are separated. This is a Hagerstrand model. This is Thorsten Hagerstrand was a human geographer through the 70s and was particularly well known for bringing together or trying to reconcile a gap between time and space that he saw in geography. You know, maps. Architecture school, you don't map time very well. I doubt if the learning outcomes have time in them. The other thing you don't do is have the word social. Check. Be interesting to see if you can. Do they have social in any of the learning outcomes? All right, do a quick find and just tell me if you do. My school didn't. So Hagerstrand out of the 70s was very interested in reconciling this schism which had opened up through representing space as something which was flat, based on the power relations of mapping spaces, and then the clocks, which are also part of that power scheme, but quite separate devices. And he developed these time geography maps where you can see people moving through a volume of time across places. Loads of problems with this, though, and Hagerstrand, in this instance, Hagerstrand's really deeply disturbed as you open up time spaces and study human relations, how the women in this context are doing an awful lot of work, responsible for taking the kid to school, going to mother's job, seems to be shopping at lunchtime. Meanwhile, the father seems to get up at 8:30, don't know where he goes there, pops to the post office, potters into work for an hour, and then goes home. So opening up these called projects, if you like, personal projects. So within this context then was the sixth sense transport that, okay, you've been conditioned to negotiate time as though it's an independent fabric, a kind of material, and that if Catherine says 1 o'clock, you're pretty good at getting here for 1 o'clock. You don't doubt that, you know what to do, you know its expectations. You also know that, you know to an extent to feel the body when it's hunger, but you also know that we're conditioned. And in a network context, what we were very interested in, what begins to happen then when network time becomes another fabric or another material within this split between time and space. Now I'm going to play you a short clip from an advert which was never supposed to be the inspiration of the project, but this I'm looking back on some mobile phone adverts from a few years ago. This is one of these conditions. So the 6 Sense project's got a cheesy name really, 6 Sense, but it posits that if you, and apparently it's the case that 70% of you, or 70% of our activities within those temporal projects are reliable enough for me to say, I know where you are 70% of the time. Sorry, it's a long way of explaining that. So for 70% of the time, you're in the right place at the right time according to your patterns. And you don't change your patterns. The way that you walk to college today has been the way you walk to college for the last 6 months, maybe even years. And you don't deviate much. So they think there's a 70% habitual model to which you're assigned to these patterns, these paths. Now within that, if data is logging all of this, then it does give us opportunities. It gives opportunities to say that, well, 2 of you just keep passing each other within a space of 5 minutes, but you don't share anything. That 3 of you get in 3 cars from the same villages, but you don't know each other does. So if we could mine that data, how could we look at correlations and perhaps talk about, I mean, 6 Sense is perhaps metaphorical, but a way of seeing opportunities for sharing and perhaps collapsing an idea that there is a determined model of time. And this then was an interesting thing to return to. This is an advert for mobile phone companies. And what they were selling you here is a 6 Sense. It's nothing to do with transport, but what they're offering you is a sense of being connected to networks all of the time with the right speed and the right volume gives you a 6 Sense. It's actually a flexible talk plan. Oh, and you can fix what you want. And I have no idea what it's got to do with fixes. All I see now is models of network capacity. Instead of the guys trying to pull plugs out, actually they're beginning to read network opportunities, correlations, and then find opportunities for you where you might mix together. So we worked across, it ends in January. We started 2010 and we run to January next year. And the project dealt with 3 case study spaces, if you like, project spaces, where we all felt that time was under some pressures or that time had opportunities for correlation with other people. The first one is, is a classic, is the walking school bus, or actually is getting to school. The school still starts at 9 o'clock, and it starts at 9 o'clock or thereabouts for a great many schools across the city, across cities, across the country. And because of that time pressure, because of the insistence of a particular instant, not a moment, not getting to school as something soft, but a hard time, an instant to get across that playground threshold, it caused traffic jams. You can imagine, you've seen them all, that the school run is very, and it's getting worse. It's exacerbated by all of us want to work. So we've got our own agendas. I have to get out of the house. Your kids go and just sort it out. And it means that using cars are about building myself flexibility. So many people get a car because it's the easiest thing you can do to be not attached to a fixed timetable. So we go and get a car. But when we get a car, it means we've got flexibility. We can drop the kids off when we want. Well, actually, it's pretty complicated because it means you get this huge, great traffic jam. So one of the areas is the walking school bus. Now, again, these are quite crude cartoons. And what we've done over the last 2 years is started to build crude apps. There's a lot of apps, for better or worse, where we're beginning to allow people to see different opportunities. So this is a very, very simple example. So this is the Johnston family. And Mum realises, I've got an early meeting this morning. I won't have time for the school run. Hey, Dad says, we could try the walking school bus app we registered for. And nearby, the bus leader of the walking school bus, you've seen these crocodiles, is alerted that the kid needs to be picked up. They can see where the snake is, if you like, on the phone. And then Mum can send him out to join the snake, the walking school bus, and everything works out. So that's just a clue as to the type of activities we're also working in. Other areas are logistics. Getting stuff across time and space is really challenging, and it doesn't often share. So we pay a lot of money for FedEx or companies just to move stuff for us. We have no comprehension of what the sharing is going on. We track it, but it's tracked to us. We rarely think that we could combine network opportunities for sharing. We simply still consciously make moves toward, get me that here, now, and bring it to me the shortest route possible. So another dimension of the project is particularly to deal with what happens if I could see more things. If I could see more things in what logistic organisations and manufacturers and shoppers call value chains, if I can see where the chains are through a way of seeing visibility across networks, I might be able to move things around with a little bit more cooperation. So in this context, Marjorie is a manager for the local Oxfam shop, and at the moment Oxfam shops are pretty tricky because they can't see where goods are. Oxfam, second-hand goods that I hand in or you hand into an Oxfam shop, I don't tag them. They're not in some very smart inventory. They're just material things, clothes, handed in. They're unique. They're not stored in databases, and they just put on shelves. So there is no really logistical framework for Oxfam. But Oxfam have got a real need. They need to help people in Syria or Haiti or wherever. So moving things to them so that you can buy them is quite important. So we work with Oxfam at the moment to develop them, give them some sense of visibility. So I'll tell you about this story. So Marjorie can see that some of the clothes are running low. But what she can do is she can talk to the banks. Now, it's interesting. When I say clothing banks, a lot of the public think they're clothing bins, because they're often associated next to the bins in recycling centres. They're banks. You talk to Oxfam, they're not clothing bins, they're clothing banks, because they're valuable resources, either to be shredded and turned into recycled material, then clothed and part of the rag trade, or they actually fill up those shelves. So what we've done is put some sensors in clothing bins and banks to count the fill level, so that people like Marjorie can see what's in there, and she could then tell her volunteer driver to go and get them. So in this story, little story here, she can check how full the nearby donation banks are using the 6 Sense app, and she looks at the Sainsbury's bin, it's the fullest, and it's over there, and it's 45% full. So I can use the app to check the location of a driver, and she tells the driver, hey, look, would you mind picking up some stock? It's getting quite full. And the stock comes to her. So they're very simple cartoons. These are a couple of years old. Another example is, let's see, Marjorie's Oxfam shop has had a busy day with donations. Sometimes it's the case, it just gets full up with stuff. And those black bin bags, which infer that they're abject, that we're done with that stuff, turns very quickly into valuable products. So again, in this context, if she uses a network technology, she begins to spread that load and pass these on to other people. So she can tell that 12 bags of missed clothing, and someone else can put the call out and say, yeah, I need some of that. So all of these projects are just beginning to share and use network visibility. They're sharing where things are, sharing communication through the social networks, if you like. They might be corporate, but nevertheless they're people networks, and trying to help the mobility around. The last area, which I think is the one which I'll spend more time in talking about, is tourism, though. Tourism is very interesting. Holidays were invented. The weekend was invented. It wasn't the case that you had 2 days off all the time. It wasn't like that. The weekend was constructed. It was constructed because if you work too much, if we keep you in the workhouse too long, for 6 days a week, and then you go to church and you don't work on 1 day a week, you produce lots of stuff. Thing is, you need to buy stuff for the system to work, for capitalism to kind of work. So we have to let you out for a day to go shopping. So that's what we do. We constructed a 2 days of the week, and more recently, when Malcolm and I were kids, actually, you had 1 day to shop, the Saturday. Sunday, you had very limited shopping hours, and high streets were pretty empty. And that's expanded. Simply because of flexible accumulation means that we need to get you buying more, because, crikey, we were making more. And we had mountains of stuff through the 70s and 80s. So an easy way is to get you out buying more. And you know now, it's easy. You can buy on the spot now. You can kick up your smartphone and you can buy stuff in H&M without going near H&M. So we're getting better at making you buy more things. You can buy things while you're working now. Quite an interesting concept. So these things are constructed. Holidays are constructed. And when we go on holiday, there are a whole bunch of different and very interesting problems. One of the problems that we were interested in is traffic jams, of lack of sharing. I mean, there's some complexity in this. We work with Bournemouth, who are the tourism co-investigators on this, and I think there are assumptions about people do want to be away. De Soto wrote a really interesting lesson about the the incarceration vacation. That actually, if you go to, I took my kids to Mallorca 2 years ago, and actually I got into a train and we got to the plane, we stayed in our seats, and then we got to the transfer bus, and then we got into a hotel room, and then we got into the compound, and actually by the time we got back home, we didn't leave much spaces as big as, this is a big space, the apartment wasn't this big. So there is this idea that you can build yourself in these quite tight, narrow, incarcerated spaces. So there are complicated things about tourism. Nevertheless, some of the things we wanted to do was open up how you begin to talk to people. And we worked with a campsite called Tom's Field. And Tom's Field, it's called Tom's Field. It's around Weymouth. And they allow people who sleep between very thin layers of nylon. Very strange camping, actually. We're quite prepared. We worry about theft and privacy and concrete, and you'll be building lots of that stuff. People are quite happy with thin veneers of nylon. Anyway, they don't talk much though. They still carry over some of their old privacy kind of habits. Kids talk all the time. You take kids camping, they're amazing. They'll spend a lot of time. So in this context, we're just looking at people and sharing again. So the teenager is grumpy and tired. Very quickly they can ping out to this strangers, but they've got in common they live on a campsite, and they begin to share lifts. So it's not very complicated, but our stakeholders want simple solutions. So car sharing. In another context, using geofencing and the locative qualities of mobile phones, we can actually start putting what are called geofences onto places. So, oh no, disaster at the campsite. Steve has forgotten to buy some beer. Oh no, and they're on a cycling holiday, so there's no way they can get back out to Sainsbury's because it's 3 miles away and tea's on its way. So what they've done in this context is they've thrown a request onto Asda or Sainsbury's or a co-op, and another member of the campers, Bob, as he walks into that geofence, picks up a message, and the shop says, hey, could you buy some beer for Bob? Well, Bob springs into action. Anyway, point is that by distributing these architectures, I think that's what's interesting, throwing an architecture onto somewhere, which is part of a social network, can begin to change the opportunities. So that's the kind of background of the project. Now, what's been fascinating for me personally is back to this thing stuff, because been some of these moving things around, it's been very interesting, because what it's starting to do is challenge what our responsibility. Because yes, there is a social network, and I kind of know who Bob is, but I don't really care. But what's interesting is, because it's the beer that gets elevated, or the car, it's actually to do with tracking things. And one of the particularly one of the tourist application means that we're beginning to elevate the role of things as go-betweens between us and opportunities and people. So let me show you a movie. So this is from the Royal Geographical Society. It's going to start as soon as I click, so I have to be a bit careful. And what happened was the app allows us to throw geofences onto places, just like for Bob, to go and pick something up. And then the bottle of beer acts as the device that says, yeah, you've got me. Can you take me home to Dave, please? And what we found was you get this very extraordinary shift. So this is me starting to make this up now, because this is where I haven't been in this talk. This is the RGS, and the colleague I was working has been told to go and get a packet of Maltesers, but we're not allowed to go to a shop. So we've had to throw and put a message out into the social network that says, can we have some candies? Can we have some chocolate from the shop? And we're not allowed to go and get it. That message gets posted up to the web and the app, and other pairs and teams can go and help us. So they act as degrees of separation to go and get things. But what was really funny is, as these things get moved around, and we pick up a request to go and get a tennis ball, is that suddenly you see a number of things happening in the street. You begin to see...
How many people were involved?
24.
24?
Yeah, and there are about 6. Yeah. So we go and get the tennis ball for someone. We don't know what it's for. We actually don't know the community who need it, but very quickly you begin to find these objects are driving people around the streets. So as we move, we're heading over there, I think. So we're travelling down here. And as I looked over the road, there was and I'm not sure who's leading, because it looks like the beach ball's in control. Because they don't know they know where they're going, where the beach ball wants to go, but they're just following and instructing where this thing goes. As we approach to get the tennis ball, we get this message, and we don't know where the tennis ball is going to go. And hopefully it'll change in a minute. But the tennis ball is given to us another partner. So we begin to get these strange tipping points where things as material, as well as events, begin to upset, or not upset, but contribute to something more networked. And here comes a fly spotter. She doesn't know who the fly spotter is for. And as we move around, we then get another instruction. Someone wants a fly spotter. So here we get this message, can anyone get a fly spotter? We just say yes. And very quickly we found that these objects were gaining mobility. Something that they haven't had before. Certainly for me they hadn't had before. So we agreed to take the fly spotter and we move along. Now I might just spin forward because you get the...
Can I ask one quick question? So all of the people that are being involved are being told to be there, or they are just going on their daily routines of the paths they usually go on?
No, they're absolutely in a workshop. So they've come to the Royal Geographical...
Yeah. So they've been told to walk around?
Yeah, they've been given some routes. So on a flat map they were told, go and get a tennis ball, Chris and Jane, and go and move it. So that's what we... But on that moment we then get a chance to start asking for and requesting for other things.
But there's no point where you're telling them where they're supposed to be going, they're just going wherever they want.
Well, I've said we want Maltesers back to us.
Okay,
so
that's the task.
You're
going to do that and then, okay.
Exactly. So what was fun here was, it was just a very strange moment when we came back into the building. The Maltesers appeared out of the blue. They weren't, they came out of someone's pocket. But there was a very odd moment of this thing got itself to me. It didn't actually expend much carbon. It was pretty efficient. I got what I wanted, some Maltesers. They're white, not brown, not quite like the classic ones. But there was a really extraordinary moment when these things had elevated. So again, so segueing on then, this is where it gets a bit delicate. It seems to suggest that there is opportunities for what in the past might have been a mobility, but perhaps a co-mobility. What might we talk about when we talk about mobility studies and John Urry's work, particularly about flow and movement? And you're very mobile. You've got lots of forms of mobility, be it through mobiles or the fact that you're quite healthy people and you can move through the city. Plymouth always afforded me a certain amount of mobility. It's quite small. I can get around quite quickly. But what happens and what do we talk about if we talk about co-mobility? Because I think that's what we're beginning to open up, particularly as things become participants within this network. Okay. So co-mobility, the best way we're going to get to this is an app we released a couple of years ago which allows people not to... There's a GPS app on the iPhone, and most GPS apps are pretty dumb. Despite you've got a complex networked device which reaches social networks and a GPS which positions me and them in places, what I can tend to do is do sat-nav, get me from there through some arrows to there, or I can foursquare them and I can be a mayor of a hypothetical town hall. But very rarely do you see and connect to your partners and your friends. So that's all that CoMob does. It allows you to be in a network and connect to each other. And we did some drawings. We'd send groups out into little groups, so you get the app, and then you say what group you're in, and then you become part of this strange web. And when we come back to the studio, we map them. What we used to do particularly was ask the group to work in this net and ask them if they could use this net to map pollution. Because things like pollution are largely abstract. I suspect if we all go out and point at some pollution, you'll point at funny things. Some of you will point at McDonald's. Some of you will point at 4x4s. Some people, we have a participant who's pointing at cars that park on pavements because it really pissed her off. She can never get pushed yet. Why do people? And that's a pollution. So you think you know what you're talking about when we talk about pollution, but you go out there, you situate some of these conversations, they become very different. So asking strangers to work in these nets and then to ring fence what that pollution is had a really good starting point for conversations of quite subjective ideas. The funny thing was, we released the app and then people started downloading it. We didn't mean them to download it. It's a funny thing with the App Store. If you put something up there, people just get it. And you don't know what they use it for. And they've been doing funny things with it. So this is, I'm not quite sure where I go with these conversations about what co-mob's doing, but there seems to be an odd co-mobility that's going on. This is a family who just, one person just stays at home. So this is me tracking them. We've got the data and they agree to all the terms and conditions that they know it's an art science project where we want to look at relationships. And in this family, someone just stays in their house, but another member goes out all day long and they watch or they stay connected. And it's a very odd sensation being connected with a piece of cable because it feels like that. You can actually push and pull on it.
How do you know they haven't left the object in the house and it's not?
I don't know that. You're absolutely right. No, I don't know. They could have done. But it happens over, if you look at the days, it happens all the way through October. They just seem to do. So, I mean, unless they're really determined to leave it there, maybe it's to get them back to their house. I mean, hey, maybe that's what it is. So there's a lot of speculation, and I can deconstruct these. This is interesting. This is Christmas, just after Christmas Day, and a family spread their network, and we didn't want to show you the maps because of ethics, really, but this is over a city, a couple of cities in America, and what happens as they move through toward New Year is that they just seem to contact family members and spread that net. And we don't know what the purpose of that is or the sensation. As they move through, you get these great jumps as though, I'm making this up, Auntie Maud gets online and Uncle Steve gets online, and was it going to show me that now?
The top node is still the home destination?
No, I've no idea. These are just different houses, different networks across the city. And when's it going to jump? Oh, I can't, it's hidden under there. I don't know what the line means to you or these people. I'll move on because it's not jumping. It takes a while we've got a terrible visualization method of showing things, so it's not easy. This is, these group are called the Motherfuckers. I don't know why, that's what they call themselves. And they jump around a city, and this is quite close up actually. So this is actually, you're looking at a number of streets, and they join together and they go hunting, or I read it as a hunting, whether they're looking for skate routes or they just stay, or whether there's a gang, I don't know. It's over in Ontario somewhere. And they move around the city as a kind of strange blob, and I still can't, I can force it. There we go, it's me really fast forwarded. And they just seem to move around like you see a number of people staying still. Our favourite is these bunch who are, let's go on to this one. These are we think they're truckers, because they tend to stop at truck stops. And one stops here, and one stops there, and another one stops there, so they join up. And they move across the Laredo-Nuevo border between Mexico and America. Quite a scary little border. And I don't know if it's a love affair. I don't know. I'd like to say that it might be. It might be just a business. I mean, they're just truckers. Is it a security framework, though? I know where you are, I'm here. Or is it just a food thing? I'll see you at that diner. I don't know. But there's a very odd, and have a go with it. It's CoMobNet. But you build a line between a partner, and it builds a very strange relationship, which we hadn't seen before.
So the police would actually have, at the moment, tracking sensitivity. So they'd actually have the ability to do this. And it would also set up their coverage. You can actually get to the point where you actually know there's more nets density in certain areas, and you could know that that's interesting feedback. We
went to the police because we were interested in the way that actually is a cheap helicopter for kettling.
Right. Okay.
But we told the police we were interested in making it available for the people on the inside of the kettle as much as the people on the outside, and they weren't too keen then. They weren't too sure about our security. Because it's interesting, it's a cheap kettle, it's a cheap helicopter. Because if what I do is put police officers at 5 points, all you have to do is hold the line, and that's what the helicopter's doing, saying, hold that line, reinforce that point, because there's a movement as well. Conversely, if we offer it to people on the inside of the kettle, they can see where there's too much distance, and there might be weakness.
What about retrospectively looking back at the Thailand revolutions, where they were all doing it through Twitter? If they had specific feeds,
GPS.
similar.
Yeah, that's very good. Oh, it does. It came out of an interest in, particularly in architecture. We've got Arthur's Seat, which is a volcano in the city, kind of urban volcano, a bit strange. And actually, it would only take 5 people with GPSs at one point to run over it. I mean, it's a big thing, but it would only take you 40 minutes to run over it. If you had all of your GPS connected in a mesh context, you would map it three-dimensionally with a fair bit of accuracy. So instead of doing LiDAR or looking from above, you could work socially to construct topologies very quickly. But no one does. There's no co in GPS.
Can you see your record of what you've been doing if you download the app? So it maps it, but so you can...
The app doesn't. So what we do is if people contact us, we give them access to the database, and there's a processing app. So if they know their group, they can mine the data. But we couldn't squeeze that into the app. We weren't quite clever enough. But if we make it clear if they contact us, they're able to do that. This is, I mean, what I find reflecting on non-co GPS navigation. These are the lines which the BBC, the Britain from Above team have used for the BBC. And these are taxi trails around London. And there's an Andrew Marr soundtrack. And he talks about these extraordinary trails. They're also, I mean, they're very vivid, very gorgeous. They're not networks. There's no co in those. They're entirely separate, autonomous projects, just like Haggerstrand projected. People are carrying out tasks. There's no co-activity in there. There may be a network of radio transmissions which are saying pick these people up, which is arguably well, for sure it's a network framework, but the actions, and they use it, the BBC use it as a vision of a net. There's no network in action on the ground. These are wholly lonely lines. They're quite solitary. I'm kind of disturbed by these ideas that it looks like a network. It isn't. They're solo activities. Just because you can kick up your GPS and pursue a line and you're connected to the network, there's no co in that process whatsoever. Right, I've got to hurry up now. So we were interested, I mean, it's a little adage to this, is what might be a co-thing then? What happens if these things are asking us to move around the city? If I know that people are part of our network so I can move them and they can move me and the things between us can move, then what might a co-thing be? And this is more of Jen, who I developed with, put a small show together in Lancaster which deals with these, instead of trying to pretend that we know who Joe or the members are, how could we talk about these being props, or how could the props of these objects, again, we're absolutely second guessing that people are moving luggage or people are playing games. But trying to talk about, there must be things in all of these co-relationships. I mean, when I say things, perhaps I mean objects. There's probably objects moving people together and around. So what might it be to cast those back as co-things? That, learning from the Royal Geographical Society, perhaps if we stopped worrying about you as being people wholly, but actually you're also in other networks and you're told to turn up at places, you're told to go, just like the objects are. How does it help us recast them? But I'm not sure about that. That's more of a... So moving on again, just bear with me. This is where some of you see the narrative goes, what the fuck was that about? So anyway, are the ideas of, well, within these networks, these databases, there's a vision Bruce Sterling's very worried about. You've had a good time on data, all right? The time has been really good. You see some really interesting innovation. You've got free apps, the stuff you got from Google for free is pretty extraordinary. You're not paying for that much. Really, you're not. But the time's probably going to change, and Jack Schultz at Berg suggests that we're now moving into a context for the next 10 years where we won't see much radical innovation because actually all of the stacks, and there's 5 stacks. Facebook is a stack of data. Google's a stack of data. Microsoft is a stack of data. Did I say Google? Oh God, I can never do the 5. Microsoft, Apple, Google, Facebook. It could be Twitter. Let's say Twitter. Yeah, because there's a stack of data there. Those data stacks.
No, it's 4.
There's 4.
WhatsApp?
Apple, Google,
Apple, sorry.
Microsoft.
It tracks a lot of data?
Well, Apple, yeah, so there's hardware and software. So at the moment, I can get Google applications on my iPhone. The next 10 years, why would they do that? They've got their 178 billion. Why would they do that? And we're seeing a lot of interoperability to an extent. Why would Android run Apple-based interests into the future? Why would they do that? So the big fear is that these stacks are going to become less and less fluid. And there's an adage. I had a friend whose mum said, hey, I need the internet. Can I get onto your internet? No, it doesn't look like the internet. The internet is the internet because it says Google on it. Can you give me the internet, please? And she had the Yahoo page up. That mum said, no, I want the internet. Can you give me I only know the internet because I see Google. So we're beginning to mentally move into these spaces. You know that when you surf Google, you're absolutely caught in a machine where your personalization, your identity, is absolutely tied to that internet. Okay? So quite complicated. And it means that what I want to explore is leaky objects. What happens when these things start moving between? Because in theory, data is pretty fluid. It should be able to move between. I went to hospital for a small checkup earlier this year, and I was given a number. It's a bit of my database as well, a bit of my date of birth, 16th of 4th, 1970, but I don't know what 5957 is. And it's funny, if you start scanning that number in Amazon, it doesn't come with anything. But if I look at that number again, actually it comes up with a phone number in India. So you begin to it occurs to you that actually there are all of these things and they could begin to connect. So you do dial it, don't you? Don't you dial? Don't you want to know this interconnection? There's no one there. It's really frustrating, actually. It would have been wonderful to find out what was in that stack compared to what was in the NHS stack, because I seem to be in two places. So things are starting to move between, and another dimension of what I'm interested in is, okay, so you've got used to the idea that this is a bottle of Buxton water, and Buxton are pretty happy because they've got a unique, not a unique identifier for the object, but they've got a unique barcode, and that's in the international database of objects that's been registered to them. They don't own the number, you can't own the number, but they've got that to them. Now, it's going to be increasingly the case, though, if there's more and more data, that this data shadow could well become different opportunities. So in some ways, the immaterial data connected to this thing could far outweigh this object alone. In fact, it might be worth trading on that, which many people are starting to do. But as they start moving between, it occurred to me that we might begin to anticipate different types of things, which might be closer to Wolpertingers. Now, Wolpertingers are a strange, mythical creatures which were used in Bavaria to tell stories. They're part of folklore, and they largely constitute from stuffed animals. Now, I think they're on their way back. I think we're beginning to find that the clarity between the real world, the actual object, the material thing, and the fact that these things are starting to move me around, maybe in the next 10 years, next few years or next weeks, that you're beginning to find opportunities to suggest that this is going to start changing its value. So, and this is what so you begin to get these ideas that these things aren't what you think they are. And they aren't what you think they are because they're no longer just exchanged across their material form. They're exchanged because of a database that is accompanying it. If the database on this, if I scan that and it says this was comes from a spring near Sellafield, nuclear plant, it might change its value. If the picture that comes up when I scan it, it begins to be associated with waterfalls and beautiful music, and I might think, well, it might increase its value. So increasingly, the data shadow is going to change its thing. And it may well be the case that all of the things you're beginning to touch and hold are a little bit like Wolpertingers, because for sure, their value is contested. A little project we're just embarking on is to exploit this fluidity around what you think you know is the thing and the fact that it's contested. Hang on. This revolution is occurring because we're moving from barcodes rather like this one, which covers the whole spectrum. All the Buxton bottles in the UK today have got the same barcode. It's kind of handy, but it means you can't track one of them. You can only track all of them. You need a unique identifier. So then QR codes came along, which I don't know the order of maths, but it turned that identifier into a unique identifier so that every single bottle could be tracked. The permutations in here of combinations are trillions. So the only reason people use QR codes is because they're absolutely unique. And it means that every bottle could be tracked. And that's not any dissimilar to your RFID tags in all of your passports. That the combinations are larger than the old school barcode, so it allows every single person to be tracked. It allows, I'm trying to think, on luggage, Terminal 5, Heathrow uses RFID on all the luggages. And it allows all of the luggage every day, forever, to have a history. You don't have to duplicate numbers, you don't have to repeat them. No one's vying for an extra number when this packet expires. Every single luggage can be found, apparently. So lots of cases.
It's not the right thing anymore, though, does it?
Say that again? No. No, absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah, and
It actually depends on people picking it up and putting it on a trolley and taking it somewhere.
Yeah.
Same as ever.
no, absolutely. But what's interesting is that,
It's just surplus information.
but in what we've seen is that while this wasn't ever cared about as a unique bottle, is increasingly moving to a condition where people want to know what Chris Speed did with his bottle.
Why?
Because they want to fine me if I don't put it in the right bin. They want to track me and associate me and maybe tax me. So this movement toward individual identifiers is a critical, and it's an opportunity. If Chris Speed buys this, it could be that thing knows where I am, and it could say, hey, thirsty, would you like a sandwich though? Because you haven't eaten for 6 hours. So the marketing communities want to know unique identifiers, because the role of just mass production, pushing Buxton out, was one model of just pushing stuff.
If you went to Buxton, you could refill that for free from the spring.
Yeah.
So if that was actually a tougher bottle, which was biodegradable, or let's say it was actually metal,
Yeah.
then that bottle could go back to Buxton through the
Well, people
synergistic
do.
co-mobility.
Absolutely.
So that then you can actually get your bottle back, which is the exact one you wanted.
Well,
If you could
people
get
take any bottle to fill up because it's free spring.
I could just,
But then it's
yeah.
waste. If you actually have one bottle which actually goes away from you and then comes back to you in a synergistic, in a loop between all these co-mobility,
Well, they do always reuse them.
not these ones, these will get thrown away.
No, I always reuse them several times.
Oh, okay, good, but that's actually bad as a plastic.
it might be easier if at the checkout it simply says there's water at the tap nearby, put it back.
Well, yeah, you know,
Really?
Well, it could also tell you that quite a lot of water is actually tap water, Pepsi Cola.
Yeah.
But you're right, I'm trying to fill the tap.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Coke water's really, and then the Nestle water's really problematic. So we were interested, but the obsession to uniquely identify things, I mean, there's a lot of politics around this, through surveillance and tracking, but we've been carrying them all the time. Some of the most interesting things we've found in the high street is that you've always had unique identifiers, but we haven't had the creativity to play with some of these spaces. So a current project in Edinburgh, just starting, is to start seeing what we can do with this unique identifier and treat it as an object with mobility that moves through the city, and how it might be able to share things. So we have a lot of museums in Edinburgh. It's bloody full of them. It's the World Heritage Site. It's soaked with the aged kind of pickled idea of pickling Scotland. But what we started to do, or the intention now, is that a lot of these things do or don't get visited. I mean, there's museums, heritage centres littered everywhere. And what happens is a lot of the tourists go to the big five. They go to the National Museum of Scotland. They actually go to the Scott Monument pretty well. They go to the national galleries. But some of the smaller galleries don't get a look in. You can't get them off. So in this project, what we're starting to do is associate the barcode with a GPS fence. So if I know where the bus is, and the buses have all got GPS attached to them as well, if they stream that, I can have a flow of all the traffic of buses across Edinburgh. Quite fun. And what it means is when a bus goes past a heritage centre, it can turn into an object. So that kids and families, instead of interrogating Google, where is the best museum, what it can do is start interrogating the buses. The analogy is that in theory, you're only ever 5 metres away from a rat. Is that the story? If you're in a city, you're even closer to cars. And the cars are travelling throughout the city all of the time, picking up or potentially able to pick up data. So if I want to know where the curry is tonight, I've got a number of options. I ask Catherine, pretty good choice. Social navigation is pretty good. I could ask Google, and it might give me the best curry according to the best price and the best advertising according to the Google algorithm. So that's biased. or I could begin to ask a car, and it might have passed a good deal. So what we're particularly interested in the Edinburgh project is trying to reconnect this mobility of physical artifacts with immaterial data and begin to recover not a smart city, but a city that allows things to flow.
So you take a photo of the car for you to find out if that car had been passed on?
There's a number. You could scan the number plate, you could type in the number plate, or if the GPS is working, it'll tell you when something's coming. So there's a dog collar coming down the road because its GPS is on and my GPS is on, and the data is shared, just like CoMob. And there's the dog collar.
So private network. So it's talking about sort of individual web sharing.
Well,
So it's a bit like a mesh. These individual meshes they're setting up, which transport information only to those that are connected close enough.
no, it will just push to the web. So the API from the buses is pushing to the web. See you later, Santa. Is pushing to the web, and all we're doing is finding out where things are, just like
So
CoMob.
the vehicles themselves, the link, which is then linking everyone else,
Yeah.
is personal internet through this mesh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So cars aren't.
So let's say if I took a picture of the Scott Monument.
I'm just going to be a bit bitchy because I'm just
Sorry,
so
no,
nervous
that's fine.
because of the time.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
two
Some
already.
people are going to start
My
to
apologies,
shoot off.
no,
So
just carry
could
on.
Yeah.
we hold that conversation? Without you sorry, I don't
No, that's fine. What I'll do is I should finish then, and what I'll do is I'm going to skip these and just finish on the last, which we're doing a performance for tomorrow. So the performance tomorrow is I've not done this before. Is based on a way of beginning to talk about what happens when the databases get very full around things, and what happens if the database on this object or this Brill cream or whatever is so deep that actually artificial agents, and we call it practice of machine learning, can start mining data and looking for correlations that we can't see. For example, it might be that the person who sat on this last had Lemsip in their pocket. Now the chair might know then that that's not the chair you want to sit on, because that might be infected by a flu bug or a cold bug. Okay? Now I can't see that, I can't know that, but it's possible with machine learning to look at histories and look at correlations and confirm that that chair's not the best one you want to sit on. So this idea that by mining the silos of each object and sharing them, you begin to afford different ideas. Now, we can't quite do that yet. I think we're close. We've got another grant to look at that over the next 3 years, so I don't think it's so far away. I thought it was science fiction, but it may well be the case. So we developed something a year ago called Take Me on Moors, which fakes it. Where what we've started to do is script stories onto traditional barcodes, but do it in a way that if I scan it once, it says hi. If I scan it again, it says, how you doing? Then I scan it again and it says, yeah, I've been everywhere today. At the moment, if I scan this once in Sainsbury's, I get one thing. If I scan it again, I get the same thing. And by putting a narrative across barcodes, we can begin to construct experiences, such as conversations. So it means it just gives us a platform for pretending what happens when objects start telling us what they'd like to do with us. So it goes back full circle to the Royal Geographical Society work. In this context, we tried it out last year where we put 40 boxes of Scott's porridge oats out, but coded they've all got the same barcode on, but every time they're scanned, they give a different version. So as this guy takes the first one, the objects want to say, I want to leave the shelf. I want to make a revolution and break away from the crowd. The guy doesn't look at us at all. He just follows that instruction. And by following the instruction, it instructs him to move it away. I'd like to move away. And he moves it away. And what's happening is, very slowly, is all of the objects are scripted absolutely by us to construct a predetermined object. In this context, it's a tower. Now, what was funny? It was good fun. It was great. We didn't have to interact. People knew what to do with their phones. They scanned it, followed the individual instructions, and slowly built these big towers. So they didn't talk to us. And what was fun is that lack of engagement with us suggests that people trust objects. You don't see any threat with a box of porridge oats. Now, there might be a flaw there, because if you absolutely trust every object because it's benign or somehow material, you might get into some hot water. We did it again in Pennsylvania a little bit later. This time what we did is took 20 different objects, but we wrote a different story on them. So in this context, there's 20 objects in the bags, and their first act is that they want to become out of the bag and become fridges, or they want to become a fruit bowl. So every object is telling the user, just take me over here, I want to be next to the pepper. And within 5 minutes, the objects had organised themselves. They're absolutely constructed. The next one, that's a fridge. Not because of its architecture, but because of its connection. The next one was the things then reorganised themselves according to local dishes. So then they became, I want to become a spaghetti bolognese. The next act, the same objects recombinated and asked other questions, and then they became political parties. So in each instance, people followed the instruction, and they grouped these objects together to then constitute architectures, which were made actually perfect sense in the context of, it looks like a fridge because it's got cold things in, or it's all the red things. Let's call it a socialist party. And this took about 40 minutes. Not once did they ask us what was going on. Not once did they didn't need to chat to each other. They chatted periodically, but they simply just got on with it. Now, either it's a really good way of sniffing out those with compulsive disorders who want to sort objects out for themselves, because in the end, 2 of them kept going, and we couldn't stop them because they were just quite happy to move objects around and resolve where they wanted to go. So, given this as a context, what we're doing tomorrow, I'll finish on this slide actually, is we're doing a theatre. So we've got a setup of a theatre space downstairs, and we've got a theatre performance, but with 5 object actors in. And for 45 minutes, the objects with a human, semi-subservient human, is going to be scanning things live with a view to find out and try and construct a performance through the engagement of these things. Again, critically, what I'm trying to do is question the role of the person in this impending context in which things will know what's good for them. It's very hard for you to know what's good for this, because I can't see from any scale in the network. But it may well be that this knows where it needs to become. It actually needs to become a vase for Catherine, because she's going to get some flowers later. I didn't know that. The network might know that. So, I'll finish there, because I'm not sure how else to finish. But it unpacks, perhaps as a first rehearsal, some of the ideas we're doing in Edinburgh around what we call design informatics. How do you design when data is your material, and that that opens up network affordances, geography, and issues of time and space and thing. What does it mean for the thing? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know if people have desperately got to get to anything at 2 o'clock, but if you've not, I think we've got time for questions.
Because it's after 2 o'clock.